The Kathleen looked as though she was a relic of New Bedford's industrial whaling past when she was anchored at her home port. The whaling industry, which had seen New Bedford become the wealthiest city in the United States, was slowly becoming a thing of the past. But the wooden bark Kathleen was also a thing of the past. Originally built in 1844, although she had originally been built as a merchant ship, a classic Baltimore clipper, she joined the whaling trade almost immediately. Having outlasted most of the other ships of her era in the trade, it was perhaps fitting that she would meet her end not due to a storm or poor repair, but instead due to a whale.
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have the story? A whale sinks the Kathleen.
Here we are. Enjoy!
Perhaps one of the reasons for the Kathleen's long life was her reputation as a lucky ship. Her voyages tended to be successful, in spite of her small 260-ton size, and she had few notable accidents in her long career. She was also well maintained, having been rebuilt a few years before her career ended, and then overhauled in 1899. It did seem as though the Kathleen's luck was beginning to run out, though. In September of 1901, under the command of Captain Smith, the Kathleen ended up on beam ends for 3 days, with the crew forced to live on the quarterdeck, since they could not safely go below. The reason for the dangerous condition of the ship, as well as how it was subsequently resolved, is not clear, but as she prepared for what would be her final voyage, she was given new spars. She also had a new captain, Captain Thomas Jenkins, who was well known in the whaling industry. On the 22nd of October, the Kathleen departed from New Bedford, heading to the coasts of Brazil, where the rumors in the local community claimed that there were huge amounts of sperm whales still to be had. The voyage started poorly, with them encountering about 3 straight weeks of some of the worst weather Captain Jenkins said he had ever seen. And one of the members of the crew who told his story, Herbert Reynolds, admitted that he had had some concerns since the ship was 58 years old. None of the accounts seemed to agree on the positions that each man held on the ship for the most part. The positions that are given come from the account of Captain Jenkins. For 20 days, the ship's hatches were battened down, but they finally reached the Cape Verde Islands. They had left New Bedford with just enough crew to get them to the fishing grounds, but hunting whales required a much bigger crew, and once they reached Cape Verde, they took on a crew of Portuguese-speaking whaling men, bringing the number on the ship up to 40, and began their hunt. They soon found that the grandiose rumors of huge pods of sperm whales had been greatly exaggerated, and after cruising along the east coast of Brazil for a while, they decided that they would head toward the Barbados in the hopes of better luck. As they reached the 1240 ground, well known in whaling circles as one of the best hunting grounds, resting at 12 degrees latitude and 40 degrees longitude, they finally spotted a large whale and chased him all day. But a rain squall caused them to miss him, and they continued. By March 17, 1902, they only had a few barrels of oil in their hold, but Captain Jenkins described it as one of the finest whaling days he had ever seen, with smooth water and clear sky. Reynolds would tell the papers that it was the largest number of sperm whales he had seen in one place, up to 300, but they were not sticking together. The crew ran for the boats. The Kathleen's 4 whaling boats were hastily made ready, and soon the only people who remained on the ship's deck were Captain Jackson, his wife, the ship's steward, and Mrs. Jackson's pet parrot, who was named Hot Tamale. The boats had soon fastened on the prizes, and Captain Jenkins did his best to bring the Kathleen to where it would be closest to the action so that they could bring the whales up to cut the blubber from them. First Mate Nichols had managed to harpoon one, and the Kathleen was quickly alongside, with boat header De Vera already hoisting the whale alongside to get to work. A quarter of a mile away, though, Captain Jackson could see a huge bull whale surface, and he immediately ordered that De Vera and his boat crew go after it. It did not take long for De Vera to catch up to the target, and standing in the bow of the whaling boat, he succeeded in getting a harpoon in. The whale stayed down for a while the crew got ready to play him out. But instead of the chase that they had expected, the bull whale charged straight for the Kathleen, which was standing nearby, as soon as he surfaced. The whale charged with so much speed that the rope that still connected the whale to the boat tore through the cleats and smelled as though it was burning. Realizing that they were about to be swamped when the rope played out, considering the speed of the whale's charge, De Vera acted quickly and cut the rope. Almost immediately after, he could see the whale strike the Kathleen. First Mate Nichols had given up the chase during this time and had come alongside the Kathleen, with the intention of coming on board and hoisting his boat back up. Captain Jenkins, who had climbed into the crosstrees of the topmast to spot what was going on better, shouted down that a whale was coming towards him, and he ordered Nichols to go join in the hunt for him. Nichols did as he was ordered, and went ahead to head with the whale, but he did not manage to get a harpoon launched. Captain Jenkins could not be certain why, but the boat steerer said that they had gotten too close, and he had not had a chance to swing his iron. The whale was able to continue his charge. Captain Jenkins would say that he thought the whale attempted to go under the ship to escape, but he was traveling too fast. Whether the whale intended the attack on the bark or not, he struck it on the starboard side, under the waterline, forward of the mizzen rigging, causing the entire ship to shudder. Having struck the ship, the whale now tried to come up, raising the ship's stern by 2 or 3 feet, and then letting it splash down. The whale came up on the other side of the Kathleen, seeming confused. Captain Jenkins turned to Jensen, who served as the ship's carpenter, cooper, and blacksmith, and asked if he thought that the whale had hurt the ship. Jensen said he did not think so, since he had not heard anything crack. First Mate Nichols was still stubbornly going after the bull whale, but the attack on the ship had put Captain Jenkins off the hunt. Not only that he could no longer see the other 3 boats, and it was going to be dark soon. He ordered Nichols to come back on board, giving Nichols an order to climb up the masthead and see if he could spot the other boats, since he had better eyesight than Captain Jenkins. Jenkins had just caught sight of the other boats when one of the men who had gone into the forecastle for dry clothing came rushing back out. The floor of the forecastle had been covered with water. Considering the speed with which this happened, Captain Jenkins could only assume that the hole in his ship was a large one, and he gave the order that the signal be flown to tell all of the boats to return to the ship immediately, abandoning anything that they were doing. Captain Jenkins would later say that De Vera refused to leave a whale he had just killed, which did not allow them to use his boat to carry more water and bread. De Vera does not include this detail in his own account, though he does say that he was the closest boat to the ship, at no more than 1.5 miles away, and saw the whale impact the ship. On board the Kathleen, Captain Jenkins gave the best orders he could think of. He ordered half of his men to go fetch water, and the other half to go get bread. The men who were sent for bread had to go between decks where the bread cask was, and they did not leave the cask until the water came up high enough to float the cask away from them. Meanwhile, Captain Jenkins went to go tell his wife the news. Mrs. Jenkins had been reading in the cabin, and was not aware of anything that had occurred. Captain Jenkins had the task of telling her that not only was the ship sinking, but it was doing so quickly, and they were going to have to evacuate. He instructed her to grab some warm clothing and leave everything else behind. Promptly ignoring this instruction, the first thing that Mrs. Jenkins did was grab her pet parrot, Hot Tamale, and carry him to the deck, and only when he was on deck did she go back for warm clothing. There are 2 stories about the escape from the ship by Captain Jenkins and his crew, and they do not agree. The first of which was told by Captain Jenkins. In his account, they escaped in the boat that was previously used by Nichols, the boat being loaded with 21 people in total, and so burdened when also considering the provisions that water was coming in over the sides and needed to be constantly bailed as they headed towards De Vieta's boat. De Vieta, on the other hand, says that he came alongside the ship and the crew went directly into his boat, since he said he rushed to the ship when he saw that she had been hit. What both accounts could agree on was that Hot Tamale was not happy about being manhandled between ship and boat and then to the other boat. As they spread the provisions and people more evenly, De Vieta delicately said that the parrot, being an educated one, swore something terrible. The sailors less delicately quoted the bird, saying, quote, "Damned hard luck, that's what I say, damned hard luck," end quote. The Kathleen only remained above water for about 20 minutes after the blow from the whale, and only 5 minutes after Captain Jenkins and those who had been on board had gotten clear, it gave a sudden lurch and capsized, leaving Captain Jenkins concerned about the other 2 boats that were not aware of anything that had happened yet. The boats that were still on the hunt for whales did not have any provisions at all, and if they could not find them, they would spend the next couple of days looking in vain for the now submerged Kathleen. Captain Jenkins and De Vieta both set their sails and headed in the direction that they had last seen their boats, and around 9 at night they came to them. Captain Jenkins then had the task of telling the shocked other half of the crew what had happened, and he split the provisions and men once again so that all of the boats were fairly equal. The sinking of the Kathleen had left 4 boats bobbing in the sea with scant provisions, loaded with 40 people, and 1,060 miles from Barbados, which was where they now directed themselves. Captain Jenkins lit a lantern, and told the other boats he would keep it burning all night, and that they should all travel together. Captain Jenkins would later claim it was a calm night with a smooth sea, but all of his men disagreed. When they woke up the next morning, Captain Jenkins could no longer see the other boats. He tried to keep his position in the hopes that they would find him again, and one of the boats, which had been put under the command of the 3rd mate, reunited with them. Once they were close, the 3rd mate requested more water, since the water he had been given by Captain Jenkins the night before was all salt water. The wind the night before had stirred the waves enough that they had crashed over the boat and gotten into the water cask. The water was again divided, but this left Captain Jenkins and his boat with only 5 gallons. Now feeling some urgency at his own situation, Captain Jenkins told the 3rd mate to stay with him if he could, but that he was no longer waiting for anyone since they had so few provisions to last them for such a long journey. That was Captain Jenkins' expectation at least, but they had a pleasant surprise. Only a couple hours later, around 9 in the morning, someone announced that they could see something ahead. It proved to be smoke from a steamer, heading right at them. It was not a coincidence. The steamer, the Borderer, out of Glasgow under the command of Captain Dalton, was looking for them. That was not to say that luck was not involved. Captain Dalton had been running a route for years that came close but was not quite near where the Kathleen had sunk. Having hit head currents on his voyage, Captain Dalton had changed his course a couple of degrees to the east in the hopes of escaping the current. One of the lookouts on the Borderer reported to Captain Dalton that they could see the sails of fishermen, a fact that Captain Dalton expressed doubts over since they were 1,000 miles from land and said that a canoe party was just as likely. Small sailing boats so far from land meant a shipwreck to him, and so he directed his ships to investigate. This had brought him in contact with the boat under the command of the Kathleen's second mate, who told him about what had happened. As the Borderer came closer to Captain Jenkins' boat, they could see one of the Kathleen's whaleboats was hanging from the ship's davits, reassuring him that one of the other boats had already been rescued. Captain Jenkins, his wife, and the crew, accompanied by Hot Tamale, scrambled up the rope ladder that had been lowered to them and were welcomed on board by Captain Dalton. The Borderer continued the search for the fourth boat, but eventually they had to give up. Captain Dalton gave his cabin to Captain Jenkins and Mrs. Jenkins for the 9-day voyage to bring them to Pernambuco, where they were able to catch a steamer to Philadelphia. With them also went the boat crew of the boat of the third mate, who had been picked up shortly after the captain, since the two boats had been able to keep together. As for the crew of the boat under the command of De Vieira, for a while it was supposed that they had been lost at sea. De Vieira and the boat of men under his command were indeed lost, but not forever. When the boats had blown apart from one another during the night, De Vieira and his boat had gone so far out of sight of the other boats that they were not able to reunite with them, nor were they noticed by the Borderer. They only had a 5-gallon cask of water and some ship's biscuit, and these they were forced to ration between the 8 men on board. De Vieira reported that each morning each of the men would get a single ship's biscuit and a cap-lid of water for breakfast, and that they had the same amount of dinner with no lunch. At first, the men kept their spirits up by singing songs and telling stories, but as time passed they became so weak that they had trouble handling the sails. Occasional rain showers helped refill their water supply, and on one occasion, at least, they were able to catch some flying fish that they were forced to eat raw. After 11 days, just as the men were starting to wonder if they were going to survive this ordeal, they came in sight of the island of Dominica. De Vieira and his crew, most of whom were the sailors from Cape Verde that had been added to the crew, were sent to Antigua once they were rescued. Here they were able to tell their story to the American consul, and he sent them on to New York. Though it was mostly through luck, everyone had survived. Captain Jenkins said that Hot Tamale announced that he was damned if he went to sea again, strongly suggesting, if nothing else, how the parrot had been educated. It was not a sentiment shared by Reynolds, who, as soon as he reached home, signed on with an expedition headed to Hudson Bay despite his recent adventure. Captain Dalton, who had rescued 3/4 of the crew, was rewarded with a gold watch and a set of nice marine binoculars for his good deed. The incident had brought up memories of the Essex, the Union, and the Anne Alexander, and placed whaling once more in the public mind, but it was still becoming the end of an era for New Bedford. In the appendix of the small book that Captain Jenkins wrote about his adventure, he included an advertisement that was published in the paper featuring wood for sale for fireplaces, scraped from old whaling vessels, acknowledging that his story was one from a dying industry and a boat that probably would have shared the same fate if it had not met with a whale.
For more information, please see Bark Kathleen Sunk by a Whale by Thomas H. Jenkins, published in 1902, or see our other sources in the description below.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.